We have a lot of ground to cover. Thank you, everybody, for joining me today. Let me go ahead and share my screen. Okay, and okay. Well, actually, let me go ahead and post this first. There will be a link in chat. You can open it up now or later, but this is basically going to guide a big section of our work here today. Okay, so I would like to welcome everyone. Thank you for joining me today to openly discuss an important topic. I'd like to give a special acknowledgement to those of you coming today from outside of the United States. Some of you may be attending from a time zone where it is night, and I'm genuinely grateful for your time and presence here. I'm Dr. Eric Nolan. I'm a researcher and a consultant working at the intersection of science education and socioscientific issues. I hold a research affiliation at California State University, East Bay. Today's town hall is prescient for the transformation before us in terms of how we engage a technology that is, what Zach Stein calls, a significant disruption to the intergenerational transmission of knowledge. In other words, how will these AI technologies benefit humanity? Before we get started, a few logistics. This session is being recorded and will be posted on the NARST YouTube channel, so please be aware of that as we go. If you would prefer not to appear on camera, turning off your video is completely fine. I want to point out early that the AI skills and experience in this room will vary. The field needs to hear perspective, and that's what I'm elevating in this forum. This isn't a session about expertise. It's about thinking together. Your questions and uncertainty are as valuable as your expertise. So before we dive in, I want to establish a few norms for our time together. This forum is to elevate perspective, so please speak from your experience. Tensions may arise in having a different viewpoint on the use of AI, so please challenge ideas and not people. If you need to sit with discomfort, that's also okay. This topic doesn't have any clear solutions yet, so let's hear from everybody's viewpoint on the matter. Please stay concise when speaking so as to not dominate the time. I'll hold to these basic forum principles, and I'd ask that you hold me to the same standard as well. Okay, so here's the agenda for today. Here's how we'll spend our 2 hours together. After this welcome, we'll start with a brief set of 4 scenarios about AI in science education. I'll run a poll for each, and we'll take a few minutes to reflect on the findings. The goal isn't to reach consensus, but rather to surface where we are on these questions. Then we'll move into breakout groups. There are 4 themed rooms. You can self-select based on which topic speaks most to your work or interest. Each room will have guiding questions within the shared Google Doc to write down some of your thoughts, ideas, and concerns. After breakouts, we'll reconvene. Each group will share highlights with 1 point of consensus, 1 productive tension, and 1 question for the wider group. We'll close with a synthesis and open floor, looking at what themes are cutting across all 4 rooms, and what's the most important question we haven't asked yet. So the Google Doc is in the chat, and it has the breakout prompts, guiding questions, and space for notes. Please open it now if you haven't already done so. So this is how I'm framing our conversation for today. AI is already reshaping how students access information, how they construct knowledge, and how they demonstrate understanding. And it is doing so faster than our research, our policies, and our practices can keep up with. What I want to propose and what frames our work today is that we treat AI as a socioscientific issue. It's not just a tool or another technology. It's a contested, value-laden, culturally embedded phenomenon that intersects with identity, power, epistemic authority, and what we believe counts as knowing. That framing matters because it changes the questions that we ask. Instead of how do we use AI in the classroom, we ask who benefits, who is disadvantaged, Whose values are encoded in this matrix of knowledge? What does learning even mean now? Those are the kinds of questions I'm hoping we'll explore today within our conversation. So, for some real-world context, here in the United States, as of April 2026, we have some examples of corporations who are investing or have committed to investing heavily in AI education infrastructure across the United States. I would like to acknowledge that this data is US focused and that similar investment patterns are emerging around the world, particularly in East Asia and the Middle East. I invite our international colleagues to weigh in on what this looks like in your country. Some examples that I can point out: Google is investing $1 billion and committing to, an investment of $1 billion to US education and job training, so AI literacy for the workforce. Pearson is offering 250,000 free AI certifications to US high school teachers. Microsoft, free AI Copilot for every US K through 12 student. Amazon, AI skills training for 4 million US learners by 2028. Meta, more than $20 million for educator and student AI resources. McGraw-Hill, committing to AI supports for 14.6 million students by 2030. So these are some examples that these are significant investments and definitely steering economies towards AI literacy for the next generation of workers. Okay. So now what I'm going to do is we're going to walk through a few scenarios together. So the first one looks at a student submits a lab report that is clearly co-constructed with an AI tool. It's the best work they've turned in all year. What do you do? And here's the prompt for that survey. Do you accept it, reject it, it depends, or I don't know? And I'll give about 30 more seconds to respond on that. Okay, I think we have everybody who's going to respond. All right, let's take a look at the results here. So a lot of folks, 12 out of 14 responses say it depends. Somebody says that they would accept it, and somebody says that they don't know. So if we want to kind of reflect on this in real time, would anybody like to chime in with their response and how you feel about the scenario and your thoughts on it? Because again, the forum is for us to share perspective.
I'll get the ball rolling. I think most people would say it depends because it depends if you want to make this a learning opportunity for a discussion of what counts for original work, the use of resources, how you evaluate external resources, and that sort of thing. So I think it opens the door for conversation. So I wouldn't blatantly just say, well, I'll accept it, but I'll accept it if we take a next step and examine this in more detail, since it's a new frontier.
And it also depends on what instructions that we gave for the assignment. If we said you're not allowed to use, or even if we ignored, what does it mean?
So you're saying if we have guardrails up in the initial instructions?
Yeah.
Great. Would anybody else like to offer some feedback?
I said depends because again, with the guardrails as well, like for example, in my class when we teach, because it says co-constructor, if you're using it as a thinking partner and you've clearly declared that in your writing of how you've used it, then I do not see a problem with it.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I'd like to add, I also said it depends. I think that the process by which the thinking occurs is the responsibility of the student. The student shouldn't offload the writing of the work of the lab report to AI. They should take responsibility for it. Because one of the things that I've encountered lately is that students really don't know that large language models can hallucinate, and they could put something into an AI that eventually gives them answers that are not correct. So I think that they need to really take a sense of ownership, and they need to be very explicit about where they went and how it was used.
Nice. And there was also a chat, or I should say a comment in the chat that says, I would like to see what kind of specific epistemic work students have engaged in when co-constructing with AI. So for me, it depends. So it sounds like there's also a curiosity there just to see how students use it if they were left to their own agency. Okay, that's great. Anybody else? Okay, so let's go ahead and move into our second scenario. Within 5 years, AI will be better than most teachers at explaining science concepts to students. And let's go ahead and launch the poll. Would you strongly agree, disagree, or strongly disagree? And again, it's okay if tensions arise. That's why we're holding this forum, because we're trying to make sense of how is this technology going to be used and what are the ethical components surrounding that use. And give it a few more seconds on this one. Okay. All right. So on this question, a little more evenly distributed. Looks like one person said they strongly agree. 5 said that they agree. 6 disagree, and 2 strongly disagree. So if these models within 5 years can potentially explain a science concept better than a student, would you agree with that or not? Would anybody like to share?
I can share that I didn't answer because I must say I don't know. I really don't know, and you forced me even not to be neutral. Forced me to disagree or agree, and I don't know. I really don't know.
That's okay. That we're in a time of transformation right now, so not knowing is definitely a valid answer. But it does beg the question, what would it even mean to say that an AI model can teach a scientific concept better than a teacher can? Okay, would anybody else like to share?
I'm going to disagree. I think that the person who just chimed in the chat kind of stole my thunder here. It's sort of like that old model of garbage in, garbage out. The key to using AI is really being able to master the prompts. If a student doesn't have the sophistication, the level of sophistication to actually write a very high quality prompt, then the response that they're going to get is going to be mediocre at best. So I really think that it's not just the teaching of the science that's going to drive whether the student learns through AI. It's really going to be how well a student is able to develop a prompt to then get the information that they actually need. And I think teachers have the ability to differentiate in the classroom setting what level they need to explain, if they need to reteach, differentiated instruction, how that really looks. So that's why I disagree. I think a teacher is going to do a better job of explaining, predicated on knowing the student better than the AI software.
Interesting
Yeah,
perspective.
to piggyback upon, I also answered disagree in that I think there are things that teachers can provide at this time that cannot necessarily be provided through AI. Relationship building, modeling, being able to debate, collaborating. And I would also put in there critical thinking too.
I would
And just
kind
to
of,
read,
oh,
go ahead.
sorry.
Go ahead.
I would say the opposite. I said agree because I work with like the intersection of socioscientific issues, identity, and decision making. And like I feel like even with the current level of AI we have, and if you use especially the prompting might be difficult, but if you use the voice enabled option, then it does have so much more capacity. And if you're talking about within 5 years, like what I'm working also, we talk about how the AI will also respond to your personal identity. It'll get to know you better. And the way it explains will kind of be custom framed or tailored towards how you understand things, how you work. So in that sense, that's why I said agree. But yes, it might not be applicable for all cultures and all different kinds of people. And that's why I didn't say strongly agree. Sorry for interrupting.
No, it's okay. And thank you for clarifying your degree of agreement, because you're making a distinction there that you can see some potential there, but it may not be absolute. Okay. We have a couple comments in chat. If students prompt AI in an appropriate way, I think AI will do better than most teachers. Teachers know their students and teach in a culturally responsive way. Another comment in here, in my opinion, experienced teachers have greater insight into students' misconceptions, which allows them to explain concepts more effectively than AI. All right, this is some pretty good feedback. Would anybody else like to share?
I would love to share. So I said strongly disagree, and I was like assuming that most folks would disagree. So that actually was shocking to see the results. But I'll start from my own like position. I'm pretty vehemently against AI for like, I don't believe that there's an ethical way to use AI. I think within 5 years, we're going to see climate catastrophe impacting children and education systems, like, you know, and if that's not part of this like overall conversation about the landscape or the whatever you want to call it, like that's extremely concerning to me, because I think that we can debate whether it's good or bad in terms of learning, but I think that there's an overall bigger picture of like, this is capitalism run amok, and this is all those companies that you had earlier, like, oh yeah, they're investing in AI education, AI literacy, but no, they're investing in propaganda so that they can make money. Like, let's be really clear about that these companies are not for education. They are for their own profit. So I know that there are smaller AI tools like AlphaFold that are not based on like the large language model, and that are less resource intensive, and that there are other like smaller tools that have less extractive properties. But I think it's hard for me to agree, disagree with these kinds of prompts without that context of um, I just don't know that AI should be in existence. And yeah, I don't know if anyone else is in that uh, like on that side of things. But I feel like yeah, anyway.
It's a great point that you're raising, Hannah. And yeah, just for the record, the data centers that are being built take up an immense amount of energy and water. Several large contracts recently have been canceled because local and state people have pushed back saying we don't have the resources to bring this here. So I came from the Southwest, Arizona in particular. They're really trying to put data centers out there and they're having a hard time. But it is real. What complicates things, of course, is that this is also becoming available globally. And I share your concern environmentally. I think for me, I've leaned into it because I feel like if I don't, then if we're seeing a bunch of shifts in the power dynamics, I may not see or at least understand why. So there's a little bit of an asterisk there. So thank you for raising that, Hannah. Okay, so let's go ahead.
I'm sorry, I'm going to say, Hannah, you're not alone in your thinking. If I could reverse time, I would. But as Eric said, the horse is out of the barn and running in a full gallop. And so I think it's something we have to attend to. And the question will become, is the whole purpose, even pre-AI, to have students trained for the workforce, or is the purpose to have students be able to think critically and passionately and ethically, empathetically for themselves as well as the community? So that's a tension that existed even before AI, but it's now compounded with AI. But you're not alone in that thinking.
No, for sure. Okay, so the next scenario we have, if AI can generate a research literature review in minutes, what is the point of training graduate students to do it? So let me go ahead and launch the poll. Okay, and we'll give this a few more seconds. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and end the poll for that. Let's share our results. Okay, so this one, I think pretty clearly tilts in a direction that the skill still matters. Nobody said the skill is becoming obsolete, and a few that said we need to redefine the skill or other. Would anybody like to share their perspective on this prompt?
I'd like to share my perspective on this prompt. So I said other because I think graduate students more than just like be able to do a literature review, like their skill is more than that. And I think, yes, it's still important. And there are things that graduate students have, like the skills that I don't think AI can do, like for example, like empathize and with the problem that you share with them. And yeah, I think it's still matters, and like other things that graduate students can do that AI cannot do, I think is my answer. So, and yeah, there's no options for that. So I said other.
Great, I appreciate your feedback on that.
Yeah, I'll chime in. I had also said, or I had said the skill still matters, primarily based on the idea that it seems like uh, those that use AI the best are actually those that kind of need it the least. They have the expertise, and then AI can actually serve as a good assistant to speed up the process. So I feel like it's pretty important to actually know how to do something, even if you want to use AI, because it'll actually make it better.
Yeah, and that's interesting feedback because it really does come down to what exactly is the skill then that we would want to be teaching grad students. Anyone else?
I want to sort of add to that point as well. AI has this very bad habit of hallucinating. So just because it can actually provide you a lit review in less than 5 minutes doesn't necessarily mean that the lit review is correct. So I think that the what makes the training for the graduate student important is the ability to discern what is of high value, what is of no value as we go through a literature review. So even though AI can go out there and find you the sources, it's still incumbent upon the scholar and the researcher to be able to go through those that bibliography and determine what is usable and what should be in the round file cabinet.
I'm going to jump in and agree with both Kevin and Alex because I'm trying to get on their good side. But beyond that, the writing process itself slows down the thinking process where people can have the time to reflect and have deeper structural changes in their thinking as opposed to surface structure changes, which is what you'll probably get with AI. As Kevin said, if you're really a good writer already and a good thinker, you can use it as a tool to look at the information and kind of condense it and then evaluate it for yourself. But I think the problem is that, as I foresee, and what I think Hannah was getting at too, is that AI is likely to displace the thinking process of deep analysis for students who are the average kind of student, and not compel them to elevate their thinking to a higher order of reasoning and consciousness, which I think a skillful professor can do. So that's, I think, the caveat that I wanted to express, but I'm glad they said it first.
Yeah, and just to point out, because I've been paying attention to a lot of the more recent models to see just how well do they hold up. OpenAI with ChatGPT tends to hallucinate a little bit more than other models. The one that I've been more impressed with is Anthropic and Claude. Their Opus 4.6 model can do a fairly good job at taking any PDF that you have, stripping it down to a basic textual file, and then whatever prompts that you ask it, extracting information out of that. So one of the skills that I can see popping up is that you can also ask the model, how did you come to your findings? And what Claude will do is it'll generate a spreadsheet and it'll break down exactly how it came to that determination. So I think we'll see like a resurgence of verification that, okay, students are going to use this, but how did you verify that what was found was accurate? That may be the skill that kind of sneaks in there. Does anybody else have some feedback they would like to share? And Hannah, I'm sorry, I'm just seeing your comment in the chat. When you say what workforce, was that for this prompt or the previous?
No, that was a previous. Sorry, I'm somebody said something about preparing students for the workforce, and what jobs are there? But anyway.
It's a good question. I mean, I'm hearing there's a lot of demand for AI literacy, but yeah, which jobs are going to be available when AI is supposedly taking over a lot of soft skills? Okay. Any last comments before we move to the fourth and final scenario? Okay, so in our scenario 4 here, AI tools will widen equity gaps in science education unless we intervene now. Okay, give it a couple more seconds on this. Okay. So pretty across the board, people agreeing that it will widen equity gaps unless we intervene now. Um, yeah, let's go ahead and open up the floor. Would folks like to offer their feedback on this one? One thing that I've been thinking about in terms of equity is kind of across the board, and it's that we know that these AI models are basically fed information. It's kind of like with social media. Anything on the internet feeds into those models. What doesn't get fed into those models? And how does that then construct what people will perceive as truth with a capital T? So, for example, we all kind of have that one friend who doesn't have a social media footprint. I don't know how they do it, but they manage to go their lives without ever having a Facebook or a Twitter or an Instagram or any of it. And they're doing just fine in life. But AI, however, would not necessarily know that that person even exists unless there are other inputs that it can gather from the internet or from data sources in general. So when it comes down to equity, who's feeding the models? How do those models construct what we think of as truth? So that's one particular equity gap that comes to my mind. Anyone else?
I can kind of see this breaking out into the global north and the global south. Having all of these data centers are actually popping up in the global north, and the global north is actually feeding the data into these data centers. And then we'll have the global south, where we don't have data centers, or where there'll be significantly fewer data centers. And so there'll be a cultural disconnect or cultural divide between the information that a person who lives in the global south trying to utilize a data center or data set that's from the global north, and there could be some disconnect in the information that they're able to retrieve from it.
Mhm. That's a good point. And that brings to my mind too, I was doing a review for a journal and I wanted to check because the manuscript seemed a little too polished. And sure enough, the whole thing came back as like 100% written by AI. And I was going back and forth with an editor because I'm like, I don't want to just reject it, but what could possibly explain this? And they said it wasn't written originally in English. So what the person likely did is that they took the language that they wrote it in, put it into Chat GPT and said, translate this, and then submitted that. So now how does that work when we're translating different languages, different dialects? So definitely something we're thinking about.
I want to piggyback off of Alex's point as well, because my home country is in India. I've seen how AI has evolved there and is evolving there in education, and I work here in the US. So that is definitely something that is happening. And the fear that I have is, yes, I agree that AI is just like calculator, like every technology, and it will be there. But then the quantum of difference, the jump between those who have and those who have not, those who don't have, are like so significantly different compared to like someone with a calculator and with not. And even with these models, yes, there's more data centers out in the global north and all that, but more and more now, all these companies are like offering free access to their models in global countries of global south because for them it's a data mine is so many different languages, so many different cultures, so many different ways of thinking. So they can train their models on that, and then they can sell more sophisticated models in the global north while giving access to the global south, the weaker models. So again, and that does not necessarily play just between global south and north. Even here, when I work with underserved communities, like the difference is so stark the access to technology. Like there's so many schools who still struggle with internet access, let alone, being able to use AI models and all that. So yeah, I definitely think it is a very big issue. And this infighting between us, like Hannah was pointing out earlier, and Dr. Zaidlu was saying, we have kind of lost control of it already, and we're kind of scrambling to do what best we can right now. So in that sense, yes, I agree, it's going to be a big problem.
Yeah. And again, that was part of the motivation to hold this forum. And I'm going to look to hold another one, I think, this summer, because this is an ongoing conversation. And to come back to Hannah's point, there was so much that I had to cover in this talk, but I have other ones lined up to talk about the environmental impacts. I think what I'm trying to look at first is what's the attraction that people have towards this, and how can we break that down? But you're right to point out that the substrate underneath all of it, though, is still in actual ecosystems that need the resources that these data settings will start extracting. Not to mention the equity piece of who's going to live around those data centers. There's studies coming out that there are health effects and impacts that are coming out from people who live near those data centers. So there's quite a bit to think about.
There's also some other ethical things that like I didn't think about, but like who's training the AI to make sure it's safe for the general population? Like who gets to weed out the violent murders and like really scary stuff? And those
Mm,
folks are in the global south making pennies to the dollar. Like there's so much, there's so many layers of unethical stuff that I think it's environmental, but it's also the again, who is benefiting and who is being harmed. And I think that those are much bigger questions than, like you said, than one forum. And I didn't even know this was going to be a forum. I thought it was going to be a webinar. So like, I thought I was just going to sit and listen and be mad, but I appreciate that you're opening the space.
yeah. Yeah. And I don't know about the rest of you, but this conversation seems to be slow. I don't see as many invitations for people just getting this together, unless maybe it's in departments. So that's where I thought perspective from an international community would help. Okay, so that will do it for our scenario portion. Now we have our breakout rooms. So we have a pretty good size of folks here. We have 4 rooms to go into. So whatever your interest is, feel free to choose the room that's resonating with your work and your interest. The one thing that I will need in each room is one reporter and one note taker. So the Google Doc that was put in chat, and I'll put it again if folks need it. This link will be, let's get you over there. This will be where we can all share our notes, and then I'll synthesize everything at the end, and then I'll send this out afterwards just to kind of act as a reflection for everyone. So we have 4 rooms. We have assessment and what counts as learning. That's in room 1. In room 2, we have teacher authority and agency. In room 3, equity and ethics of AI in the classroom. In room 4, new research questions and methodological directions. So again, whichever calls to you more, feel free to go into that room. I will try to find a balance in our room, so that way we have enough people to generate a conversation. One person will be the reporter, so when we come back and reconvene in the main room, the reporter will be the one to share back your group's insights, and the note taker, and that can actually be the whole group if you want. If everybody feels like you just kind of want to add into the section there for your room, feel free to. On the front page of the Google Doc link that I just sent, you could click on those links and it'll take you right to the room below. The main portions are your notes, 1 point of consensus, 1 point of productive tension, and 1 question for the wider group. So when we think about these different focus areas, we'll come back. So before I open up the rooms for you to self-select which room you want to go in, consider now if you'd like to be a note taker or a reporter, and then we can go ahead and get that figured out. Okay, so those rooms are open now. Feel free to go in and basically just use the prompts that are in the Google Doc, and that'll hopefully get the ball rolling.
Eric,
Yes, sir.
I'm sorry, I'm probably a little slow, but I don't see where I'm actually joining the room.
Let's see. Do you have a breakout room prompt anywhere down below on your ribbon?
Let's see if I go to more. I do. Okay, got it. I'm used to creating breakout rooms, and then as a teacher, I can join anyone I want. But okay, got it. Thank you.
No problem. Okay, and for the rest of everyone that's here, you may be joining the call, just kind of have it in the background. I think I'll just kind of randomly assign you to rooms, but at any point you can leave that room and join another room that you're interested in. So feel free to reassign yourselves however you'd like. Okay, so for folks coming back in, we're gonna open up the floor here so that way folks can respond to different props, share different aspects of what you talked about. But first, let's just kind of go down the list here. So any one of the rooms, if you'd like to volunteer to go first. I think room 3 was the only one that we didn't have anyone in there, and that's okay. With a larger group, maybe we would have, and we are, I think, kind of seeing that equity and ethics kind of lays on top of everything, no matter which room that you're in. It's just kind of inherently baked into the conversation. So, would anybody from rooms 1, 2, or 3 like to, I'm sorry, 1, 2, or 4, like to report back on some of the notes from your discussion, one point of consensus, one productive tension, and one question for the wider group?
Yeah, so I'll jump right in. So we were part of group 1 with the assessments and what counts as learning. So our discussion, for the most part, was contention-free. Everybody was kind of in agreement with each other, where we were generally relatively open to using AI, but the key part is exactly how. So in general, it was just a consensus on AI should be used as a resource for the students. It should be something for them to gather references, to verify information, but it should not be the producer of any kind of knowledge. That should be, at the end of the day, the student's responsibility. So our big goal in the classrooms would be to just show students that AI is a tool to be used, but not to offload thinking. And then some productive tension. Well, like I said, we didn't really have too much tension. Instead, we were able to kind of note there are tensions in the system as a whole, specifically when it comes to the administrative bodies trying to decide what to do with their assessments, especially the standardized ones, in the presence of AI. Do they stick to the traditional assessments that AI can excel with on its own without even the students' input, or do they start trying to cut AI short? And then finally, the question for the wider group. Um, well, it's kind of exactly the topic. What kind of assessment model is needed to shift the perspective of assessments? Because it feels like that's what we kind of need to decide first. What are the assessments really for? And then we can find a new model that fits it.
Great.
I like
And
the
it sounds like,
I'm sorry. I like the sparring partner analogy that I think in your group, you said you can have students help bounce ideas against, their ideas against AI to help prepare themselves, for an exam or some other assignment.
Yes, that came from Alex, actually. He uses it in his classroom and tells his students, he kind of helps them set it up, but he uses it as a sparring partner, he puts it, that they bounce their ideas off.
interesting use of the technology. And Hannah, then it comes back to, if we're using this in classrooms, including even the general public's use, what does that mean on the demand for energy and resources? Because, it's a great tool for human learning, but we have to crack that code or potentially disband from using it. Um, okay, great. So let's see. Is there a question, Kevin, to the broader group that can come out of that?
Yeah, it was the last part. So what kind of assessment model is needed to shift the perspective of assessments?
And this is an open floor, so anybody can feel free to chime in.
I have an addition to that with Dr. Nolan comment. So I asked Rachel about if they have frameworks in the district. So it will be interesting to include in those frameworks about the real cost of AI that many people don't know about, all what is needed to use AI and environmental issues that this might produce. So
About the question, I would say, like in my class, when I allow students to use AI, it's the same thing, just like a sparring partner. And so you have to have your end product and also your process along with it. So assessment can include the process along with the product.
So it's a different way for the students to show their work. Great. Let's see, does anybody else have feedback? What kind of assessment model is needed to shift the perspective of assessments?
I think a lot about learning and how we measure learning, if you will, and sort of the messiness of learning. And so I often think about like assessment even outside of AI and like, what does it mean? Even some of our really creative projects that we've had students do, like if they're using the internet pre-AI, like, again, how much synthesis are they doing or are they just regurgitating facts? So I don't know that there's going to be one model that's going to help us like I think it might take some work and some effort to really like show students that learning isn't linear, that learning is messy, that you know that science is messy, that we learn something and then we find more evidence and we have to sort of redo our understanding. So yeah, it might turn into sort of less of a checklist and more of a, I don't know, messy, complex model.
And I don't know if this directly applies, but I always think in the Harry Potter series in Hogwarts, how did they assess students in Hogwarts? Because you're really recognizing the plurality of personalities. Everybody has their own special talents and skills. And is it just that you're tapping into that? So as long as learners indicate growth and development in several different aspects, whether it could be moral development, emotional development, cognitive development, like there's many different lines of development that human beings have exhibited. And it seems like we're kind of tilting towards a redefinition of that sort of assessment when we think about the full human development. Okay, so let's see. We have room 2 and room 4. Would anybody from those rooms like to add your notes, your points of consensus or productive tension,
Yeah,
or a question for the wider group?
I'll go for group 4 on
Go for it.
new research questions and methodological directions. A lot of our discussion focused on using AI tools for collecting, analyzing, primarily analyzing data. And a lot of the discussion was around qualitative analysis and using AI. And well, my point was I've heard good examples of using it for qualitative coding as like a partner in it, not just saying, here's a bunch of transcripts, go code it and tell me the results. So I think a point of consensus is that there are benefits to the research space, but there's questions related to quality, at least currently. And productive tension was how do we shape where and how it's used. And I guess we didn't write down a question for the broader group, so I don't know if any of the partners want to add something.
Can I react to something that your group has come up with, Andrew? And it's
Sure.
it's not limited to AI conversations. But Andrew mentioned how you could use AI to help analyze qualitative data for thematic coding and that sort of thing too. And of course, there are other tools that already exist for doing that. And it's not that I'm completely a Luddite and anti-technology, but I still always wonder if students place too much unfounded confidence in those kind of tools, whether it's something that exists now or AI, in that it's easy to look at common words or common theme and something else will group that together for you. But it's another to interpret that, to understand whether there's a larger contextual meaning that's significant to that. Is it just some superficial connections? And so it still always comes down to the individual to place a layer of analysis and expertise on those themes and see if there's really something meaningful to it, and even connected in other ways to themes that didn't get generated because the large language models don't have an understanding like human beings do, make those kind of esoteric connections. So anyway, I just find that sometimes students have undue confidence, whether it's a statistical result, or a qualitative thematic result, and relying too much on SPSSX or thematic analysis, and not putting their own understanding of the broader area into it. Anyway, I've always worried about that. So I think Andrew was an important topic to bring up, and the things that your group was wrestling with, are things that we have wrestled with in the past too.
And would anybody from the research group like to add anything to that, or any questions you'd like to pose to the group?
Oh, the only things I would add is like we spoke about how when we do analysis, we use the research question and the meaning of the question to actually do the analysis versus the relationship between the words. And we can ask the question, but how can we understand the logic behind what the machine used in order to do the coding? And the other thing we spoke about is how using these tools, the speed at which research happens and the papers come out, people write, all that has increased significantly. And what does that mean if the people who write these papers, if they are using AI tools to write, do the reviewers who get so many manuscripts to review also use AI to start reviewing them? And then what happens to the quality of it? How do we come to terms with that tension? And how do we kind of form? We thought that it's too early for a framework or something, but it definitely needs some guidelines or some direction that will help it. And the most difficult part is to come to a consensus in order to do that. So I guess that is where we left it. So that can be maybe the question, unless Kelly, you want to add something.
No, I think that covered it. But I think when I was listening to you give that summary, yeah, it made me think again how the ethics sort of weaves through all of these topics because, you know, if AI informs how we analyze the data and then how we write it and then how we review it. And so there's this Gen AI tools sort of hand in all of it. How is that changing, you know, what research is produced and whose voice is coming out? So again, if it's, what bias does that introduce if, AI is part of the process the entire way?
Yeah, one thing I wanted to add to that as well, when I jumped into their room for a moment, and I've been thinking about this a lot too. For most folks in this room, and probably in education in general, we're talking about the public sector's use of this technology, never mind the private sector's use of this technology, where that's a whole other level of how they're going to use that for market research and what customers want, that sort of thing. So it's, again, I think that's why we should be continuing this conversation because we're going to have to see how do schools keep up with this? How are we trying to teach this as a skill that can hopefully benefit humanity and not just, bottom line or profit motives for companies down the line? Would anybody else like to add anything regarding research questions or methodologies?
I think one of my concerns here with the teacher authority is that doesn't, like, as we keep focusing on AI's effect on the student and their learning abilities, but AI's effect feels like would also be kind of backfire on the teacher, that if AI is pushed enough in a classroom, that the teacher actually loses authority in the student's eyes with regards to subject matter expertise, or why should I do it the way, why should I do long division your way when the AI says to do it this way, that kind of thing. I would worry, I don't know if there's a question, maybe it's just a comment. I would worry how the teacher survives in this environment and doesn't just get replaced by the AI altogether.
Kevin, and I apologize, were you in room 2 about the teacher authority and agency?
No, I was in room 1.
You're in room 1, sorry. Since we're talking about teacher authority and agency, would anyone from room 2 like to add?
I don't mind. So we absolutely did not. We took our own agency and autonomy and forgot to fill out all the boxes. And so I will say that we talked a lot about like some of the things you just brought up, Kevin, of like, if the teacher isn't sort of the holder of knowledge, then, what is their role? And then in different places in the US or globally, where teachers have more or less autonomy over what they're doing in their classroom, what does that look like? We talked about briefly about teacher preparation, what, where that will land with AI, and that like there are absolutely benefits to student learning, especially individualized. I know like one of the big meta-analyses that came out found particular advantages in second language or additional language learning. So although I am vehemently anti-AI, I am trying not to be a Luddite about things and like learning as much as I can about these things. So, but yeah, others from my group, I'm sure, have plenty to add.
I can pick up what we were in that group and like Anna said, we weren't beholden to Eric's authoritative dictates. It's mandated. No, we just got engrossed in great conversations. I think one of the things that were interesting is we talked about, the role of the teacher in this new era, and again, I think the role of the teacher is still the same as what it had been, in that we had written down, relying on too much technology can lose students' soft skills, but teachers can compel students to develop those soft skills and compel them, in a compassionate, understanding way, in an encouraging way. So, given the fact that, you have a lot of reasoning, discourse, socioscientific reasoning that's taking place in an SSI kind of environment too. And if students rely too much on any technology, but particularly AI, they can, just like the age of the screen ager, where they've lost the ability to communicate well with one another. And I've gone to in other countries too, including Taiwan and other Asian countries. And I'll take a bus, and we come up to a bus stop in which there are 50 like university students standing there, independently of one another, each on their iPhones, and there's no social connection. And I think that gets transferred into the classroom as well, where students over rely on technology to do their thinking for them, and I just think they lose the ability to question other students and to interact with them and really listen to them. They're more concerned with their own little private domain of technology knowledge generation that's in front of them. So I think teachers can help in that way to reduce the screen ager generation to one in which there's more a social fabric in their communication with one another.
I'm sorry, I have not heard that term before. Screen ager?
Yeah. Well, there's the age of the new teenager is a screen ager now.
No, I've not heard that one before. That's a good one. What do other folks think about that? How does that place the authority of the teacher in question? Because, like has been brought up, if you're speaking freely, which we do every now and again, you have a gap in the way that we talk, or we might say something kind of misrepresenting what we actually know. But if the student picks that up and then they look it up on AI, I mean, how many students are already doing that in college classrooms where in a lecture hall, they're just looking at the professor like, what are you talking about? So they're distracted from what even the point of the lesson is. And now they're busy focusing on, well, the internet says you're not right. So how does that then place it for other teachers? Or do we just embrace it and kind of look at it as a bottom-up approach, which is we're walking students through the process of checking for credibility, checking to make sure that things are verified, as opposed to that top-down approach of the teacher is the one who has the knowledge, and the way that we deliver it is the way that students should be taking it. What do folks think?
I want to make like a brief point about both the things that were said. The first thing about what you said, like I think in today's classrooms, in many of our classrooms, we've moved beyond that idea of teachers pouring knowledge into the students, and now the teacher is just the facilitator. And so like in my classroom, it's always like I'm learning with you and I might be wrong. The moment you see I'm wrong, call me out, and then we'll discuss about why it is, where I went wrong, how it, and then we'll all learn. We'll all be better for it together. So that is one aspect. If that is like, and that ties into the second thing that I wanted to talk about again, especially in K-12, we are starting to see already many governments starting to ban technology and phones in schools for under 16. So many people are already realizing there's so much research as to the negative impacts of screen time and short form videos, all these things. And when we talk about education, like for example, science education, outside your content knowledge, you also have your practices and your skills and your argumentation and collaboration, all those things, which at least as of now, you cannot do with AI and just on technology. You have to be there doing it. And so again, teachers' role as a facilitator there. And finally, like going back to the idea of why do we send our students to school? It's so that they can learn to function in the democratic society and participate in it. And for that, the school should be an emulation of the wider society. And so for that, you need some guidance, someone who has that experience already. So I feel like the role of the teacher from knowledge giver, that load has been offloaded, and it's more like a facilitator, life coach, guidance, but in your specific streams kind of a role now.
Sounds like it'll make for some interesting professional development. One of the things that came up in a couple of the rooms is there's an uneven adoption and readiness across districts, grade levels, and populations. So, how are we having this conversation with teachers who have already been certified? They're already experts in their subjects. And now you're basically saying, well, but the district wants to use this tool. Or in some cases, the district maybe doesn't want to use the tool, but then it begs the question, but what are the students asking for? Are the parents of these students saying, hey, I have a friend that's in the neighboring school district and they're using AI and I would really love to see that for my student. Seems like an important skill for them to have. So clearly, there's plenty for us to think about. Does anybody have any general comments about any of the rooms or the focus areas or questions that you feel we haven't answered yet? It's a lot to take in. When I started this journey for me, I wanted to jump on the sustainability bandwagon. I mean, I started working for nonprofits first before I went back to school. And then when I went back to school, I just learned more about climate. I learned more about the social impacts. And then out of nowhere, AI. So I understand that for a lot of us, I mean, I don't know. I think I'm a little bit older. In the 90s, we thought this technology would come somewhere in that decade. So we've kind of been waiting for the sci-fi movies to, deliver on the promise that AI would actually give us like a Jarvis, an Iron Man, or something like that. But now that technology is kind of there. It's kind of getting to the point now where it can handle complex tasks. And these are really the initial models. I cannot imagine 5, 10 years from now where we're going to be with this technology. And since nobody was in the equity and ethics room, maybe that might be a good time to kind of prompt that for the open discussion, because how are we going to resolve this? First of all, let's say there are environmental restraints and some moratorium goes out there and says no more data centers. It's going to spike the access point, so the cost is going to go up. And then who's going to be able to get into that space? And then what advantage is it going to have for the work that's done there? I mean, one thing that's been shocking me about some of these models is work that would have taken me like a month. It can be done in like 30 to 60 minutes. So I'm going through and like, okay, well, I can at least, ask these models to show me their work so I can verify it. So at least I can do that. But I think it was Dana was mentioning something earlier, and we've talked about this in a couple of research teams that I'm on, but how we interpret that information, that's the human component that comes back in, because we're the ones that we precede AI. So we have a much more intimate connection with the knowledge that's been passed down for who knows how many generations that brought us up to this moment, and how we then can differentiate between an AI model of knowledge and then an animal survival understanding of knowledge are kind of two different spaces. And that might be where we try to help teachers along to understand that you still very much have a role to play, that Kids are still going to be growing up and they're going to be in classrooms realizing that life is fragile, it's finite, that resources are finite, and how we walk them through this process deepens that knowledge that they're going to be exposed to. So let me ask this to the group. When we think about equity, how does access, language, culture, and bias shape who benefits from AI tools?
You want me to take a stab at it?
Go for it.
I'm like the worst person to answer this question since I'm what people are scared of. I studied race. I talk critical race theory. I'm that. So all of the systematic oppression that has been built into the United States in particular, and then other places with similar models and economic models and whatnot, like all that oppression is built into these systems. So even if we take AI out of the equation, just like a Google search, a Google image search of a scientist is still going to show you white men. I showed that to my high school students on day one, and I could, it's the same thing now. So all of that isn't, AI isn't gonna, I don't think, isn't going to improve those kinds of things. So I have a lot of, I have a lot of questions about like people's labor. What happens when there's fewer jobs? Who's going to be let go first? I mean, somebody is going to make money off of this technology. It won't be teachers. And I don't know that teachers are going to be the ones like having some of these questions, but I think um, parents and students and whatnot will be, and teachers will kind of have to have an answer. And whether administrators support teachers in their own policies, or whether they just sort of let parents kind of steamroll the conversations. Like, I think there's going to be so many complicated things, and it would not surprise me if I know someone mentioned like sort of the taking technology out of the classroom, not just phones, but like using fewer internet resources in general, because forcing kids to use their brains a little bit more. So yeah, so I could talk about this all day, but again, like
Yeah, I've recently read articles in it may have been the Washington Post, how some school districts are sort of reversing that trend of having, a computer for every single student. They have the carts that usually go out to a classroom, and now they're using those carts a whole lot less often because of the fact that students haven't been able to develop the social cultural skills and communicative skills necessary for a well-functioning group. And so yeah, there are some schools that now are reversing that trend, and they're literally limiting the amount of time that students can use technology. And not doing away with it, but severely limiting it for those reasons.
Yeah, and I agree with both of those points that you raised. And I recognize too that school, like especially in the K-12 space, there are so many things that they have to sort of the considerations. I'm sitting in on one of the task force at a local school district as they're trying to figure out what do we do with AI and how do we handle it in our schools, and all that they have to consider because they have such a wide age range and age span, but also recognizing that, while there's benefits to not having students one-to-one with technology all the time and, really developing those thinking skills, that they also are trying to prepare the students for what, their next steps are after they graduate or after they leave high school. And if the workforce that they enter or the jobs that they are part of require this technology, they don't want to put them at a disadvantage for not having it. So having to balance all those different tensions and meet the requirements of not only like the standards that their states are handing down, but what their parents want for their students, what they know is best as teachers. So having all the moving parts that we know are a part of education, this AI piece and technology piece just sort of further complicates all the decisions and things that they have to think about as they're weighing it. It's been very interesting conversations to listen as people bring in all the different points of view and realizing there is no simple answer. How do we grapple with this?
Yeah.
While you were making your points, that was making me think about we've already had issues with, for example, face identification software used by cops who did like the
Hmm.
software was biased because of how it was trained. So we do not know what is happening with the current training models because obviously the data that they have been trained on so far is of the global north. And then with that, what like simple things like what it means to be good, what it means to be responsible, all these things also, the definitions, like in India, we were told that, oh, you have to like modesty is important, humility is important. But here you need to be able to put yourself out there. So it's very different as to what a successful person looks like, depending on where you come from. And then if students and all of us start using these and we get like mixed ideas or different ideas, then that also brings in the question of like who's at the end of the day responsible for all of this, because we've already seen instances where like AI models suggested uh what self-harm and those kind of things to individuals. And then is it the company who has to take responsibility? Like we already saw it happen like very badly with the social media movement. And now with AI, like we don't know what it's going to be like.
Yeah, now that made me think of I forget which company it was, if it was Meta or Google or somebody, but they hired their morality guru, somebody who's an expert in moral philosophy. And they're the ones who are going to be guiding how they ultimately are going to make those decisions. And then how is this technology used when, for anybody who's studied moral philosophy or moral theory more generally, there is a developmental component to that. And there's not one way to be moral. There are multiple capacities that we have within us. And how does a model know how to approach somebody with that in mind? Um, One of the questions that's, I think, tied to this is how do we center justice when the technology itself encodes particular epistemologies? So we've been talking about how the global north is going to be feeding these models. And how does that play into other communities? I've been working with some professional development providers and teachers in the global south, South America in particular, and just getting an understanding of how their communities come together, of how they run their local economies. It's distinct from how we do it here. And how is AI going to be able to benefit their models, or is it just a slow assimilation to the people who are the furthest down the road? And that's another piece of the puzzle. So um, let's let me ask, just open that up for other people. How do we center justice when the technology itself encodes particular epistemologies?
I want to hold space for other folks, but I'm also happy to answer because it's where I'm at. I
Go
think
for it.
so. Yeah. So, and I also just Karen Howe is like a journalist. She's been writing about AI for years now. She just gave a lecture at. She's kind of on like a speaking tour, so she's popping up at a lot of universities. But she had a really good analogy of like AI being like a rocket ship, and it's really good at this like big if we're thinking about transportation and a rocket ship is like really good, for transportation, it's really fast and stuff, but like we need more bicycles. We need more things that like can get us, uh, the results that we're looking for, but without all this like as much extractive practices. And so, like the AlphaFold or like specific apps that have like a very specific use and are not just like mining all of our data that we put out in the world. So I really think that as much as possible, thinking about like data sovereignty and ownership of like who owns these models, and if communities can find ways to build their own models and sort of opt out of the big players, I think that's like one of the ways that justice can be centered. Because while the global north is pioneering these things, we absolutely know that the US is not full of justice, or it's full of injustice. And so, you know, when we say we are doing this, we're talking about the elites in the US. You know, anybody with a master's degree is doing much better than anybody who is like living in poverty. So it's, you know, this really small percentage of folks that are benefiting, that are creating these things, that are, you know, promoting individualism and all those things. So yeah, it's I think that there are ways to center justice, but it really requires a very like authentically democratic process.
Now, Betty, like to respond to that, and perhaps folks who haven't really spoken up much, feel free to chime in. We'd love to hear from you too. Well, another prompt that I'll put out here just before we wrap up. What ethical considerations should guide the adoption of AI in K through 12 science? So right now we have a lot of conversations that are happening with district administrators, whether you're talking about departments at a university, just schools in general. People are having this conversation. They're starting to get AI policies online. What's being left out? What should we talk about? This may be the point where all of our brains are feeling slightly fried. It's been a long 2 hours. There's been a lot to absorb, and that's okay. So let's see. Before I sort of give the wrap up, I'll just open the floor one more time. Are there any comments or questions, just in general, about anything that you'd like to bring up before we close?
Can I offer a 10-second pitch if people are interested in writing about this topic?
Absolutely.
So if I'm writing a handbook of research on socioscientific issues for education and society with Springer Nature. And if you're interested in possibly contributing a chapter to this, you know, because we have room for like 1,000 to 1,500 pages, feel free to contact myself or Kevin Rosario here, who's helping with this. And all we need at this point is a one-page abstract of potential interests. And I think all these conversations we're having are ripe for inclusion in this handbook. And I can send you, or Kevin can send you, an outline of our proposed, you know, kind of concepts for chapters. It's very flexible. But if you're interested in writing a piece that's close to your heart about these conversations that connect to SSI for education and society, just let us know. Send us an email, and we'll send you the information for writing that one-page abstract, and then what will happen from there. That's all. Thank you.
Great. And Dana, when's that abstract due?
End of May.
Okay. So if you're interested, the email is in chat, kevinrosario@usf.edu. I think I'm also going to submit a proposal to this book because these are the type of issues that are going to be in there. So socioscientific issues are, you know, anything at that intersection of science and society, and there are plenty of topics to choose from, AI being one of them. But obviously AI is now kind of creeping into several other complex issues that we're dealing with. So when we talk about social justice or sustainability and climate, all kind of wrapped up into one big complex mess. Okay, so I will close for here. So where do we go from here? What's the most important question we haven't asked yet? This is a question that's going to be ongoing. I mentioned earlier that I think I may put out another proposal to have another one of these in summer to keep the conversation going, to get a larger group, get more perspective. Who knows what models are going to make a monumental leap at that point? I was talking in one of the rooms that AI is the big, sort of jargon word that people have attached to now, but agentic programming is the next one that's coming. So as these models become more sophisticated, they're going to act as agents. So they're going to be able to have a thought partner, data analysis type of quality to them. So now how are we going to use that in the context of teaching and learning? So this recording will be shared on the NARST YouTube channel. The shared doc with the notes and resources from all 4 breakout rooms that are in that Google Doc, I can send that out in an email to everybody just as kind of like a reminder or reflection piece. If you'd like to stay connected with me on this topic, you can reach me at eric.nolan@csueastbay.edu. And I really cannot thank you enough for joining us today. I think this was a very productive conversation, but also insightful, because this issue isn't going anywhere anytime soon. And I think the more that people talk about this and raise concerns, the more we can get this into the political space, which is now we have to put up the rules that can hopefully make sure that we're not substituting teaching or learning and just letting AI do all the work for us. And we just sort of sit back, like in, I think it was the movie WALL-E, where all we're here to do is consume, but really all the work is being done by robots and all of this AI stuff. So thank you all again for joining me today. Feel free to reach out, and I hope you have a beautiful rest of your day.
And nice to see everybody. Thank you.
You.
Thank you.
Thank you.